Bill Gates, how we can close the vaccine gap much faster next time. But within this amazing success, there is a startling disparity. Just over 2% of people in low-income countries have received any COVID-19 vaccines. And the gap will be harder to close as the world's richer governments buy up extra doses to serve as booster shots. Sadly, this inequity is not new. It is not even the worst gap in global health. There were shocking disparities in health long before any of us had heard of COVID-19. Every year, more than 5 million children die before their 5th birthday, mostly from infectious diseases, and almost entirely in low and middle-income countries. A child in northern Nigeria is more than 20 times more likely to die before the age of 5 than a child in a rich country. That is simply unjust, and reducing this inequity has been the Gates Foundation's top priority for more than 20 years. If you step back and look at the trends, though, there is good news. Since 1960, the childhood death rate has been cut by more than 80%, thanks in large part to the invention and distribution of vaccines for children around the world. The fact that routine childhood vaccines are reaching so many people is reason to believe COVID-19 vaccines can too.
Providing them to everyone who needs them is one of 3 crucial steps in controlling this pandemic, along with containing the virus so it doesn't come roaring back and coordinating the global response. At the same time, we can learn from the inequities that were so clear during this pandemic so we can do a better job of closing the gap during the next one. How could we achieve vaccine equity in a future pandemic? I see 2 ways change how the world allocates doses. What would the optimal allocation look like? It's not simply a matter of proportional representation, where if your county has X% of the world's population, you get X% of the vaccines. There are 2 different benefits to consider, and both are important. A 70-year-old COVID-19 patient is 90 times more likely to die than an otherwise healthy COVID patient in their 20s. From a global perspective, it is neither fair nor wise to protect that young person before the old one. Second, when an individual is vaccinated, society gets the benefit of lowering the risk that the person will spread the disease to others. This is the core of the argument in favor of vaccinating health workers and people who work in elderly care facilities, since even when a lockdown is in place, they can transmit the virus to people at high risk. Those will not necessarily be low-income countries. When COVID-19 vaccines first became available, many of the most severe epidemics were in rich and middle-income countries. The gravest inequity, even more than vaccinating rich people before poor ones, is vaccinating young people in rich countries before older people in middle-income countries with bad epidemics, such as South Africa and most of South America. To their credit, rich countries have pledged to share more than 1 billion doses with poorer countries during COVID-19. But they haven't yet delivered fully on those pledges, and even if they had, the gap would still be enormous. That's why it's so important to find ways to produce more doses in less time. The world should have the goal of being able to make and deliver enough vaccines for everyone on the planet within 6 months of detecting a potential pandemic. If we could do that, then the supply of doses would not be a limiting factor, and the way they were allocated would no longer be a matter of life and death. Make more doses. As limited as the supply of COVID-19 vaccines has been, the situation could have been even worse. We are fortunate that mRNA vaccines work so well, since this is the first disease for which the mRNA technology has been used. If they hadn't, we would have been far worse off. It is also great that some vaccine companies entered into second source deals, which allowed huge volumes of their vaccines to be manufactured by other firms. This was a crucial and remarkable step. Just one example, in less than 2 years, a single manufacturer, AstraZeneca, signed second source deals involving 25 factories in 15 countries. You may have heard the argument that waiving intellectual property restrictions would have made a difference. Unfortunately, that's not true in this case. IP waivers and licensing are complicated issues, so I want to take some time to untangle it. There are cases in which IP licensing is a great way to make something cheaper and better. For example, in 2017, the Gates Foundation and a number of partners were involved in an agreement to make a new, more effective version of an HIV drug cocktail that would be more affordable for the world's poorest countries. In the deal, a pharmaceutical company gave the recipe for the key ingredient in this cocktail to firms that specialize in producing generic drugs. These firms were able to reduce the cost so much that today nearly 80% of people who get HIV treatment in low or middle-income countries are receiving the improved cocktail. Unfortunately, IP licensing doesn't work as well with vaccines. Here's why. Many drugs are made using chemical processes that are well-defined and measurable. If you mix the same ingredients in the right proportion and so on, you'll get the same product every time, and you can check your work by looking at the chemical structure after the drug is made. Company A can give a recipe to Company B, and Company B will be able to make precisely the same drug consistently. This is why broadly waiving IP protections would not meaningfully increase the supply of vaccines. Supply has been limited not because of IP rules, but because there aren't enough factories capable of handling the more complicated process of making vaccines. So how can the world make more doses faster next time? First, decision makers should get serious about expanding the world's vaccine-making capacity. In particular, governments and industry should make sure there's enough capacity to quickly make huge volumes of mRNA vaccines. Now that we know the mRNA platform works, it will allow new vaccines to be developed faster than any other approach. And if companies that have second-source deals now maintain their relationships with each other, they won't have to start from square one in the next outbreak. Another step is to develop prototype vaccines against the diseases that are most likely to cause future outbreaks, and to develop universal vaccines for flu and coronaviruses, which would protect people against any form of the two pathogens. The National Institutes of Health and Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations are doing excellent work on both, but even more research is needed. One longer-term step is for more countries to build the capacity to develop, manufacture, and approve vaccines themselves.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.